Tonight, you're going to hear some things, very good practical advice, not only from the Bible, but that apply to life in America. And you're going to hear some things and learn some things about the United States and its current condition that you're not going to like to hear, but you need to hear. And you need to know how to navigate the coming days. But as everything we do, is we relate everything to the Bible. In fact, what we do is the Bible comes first and we relate everything to the Bible because that's the best way to look at life. If you try to apply the Bible to life in the reverse order, you can get a little bit lost. You put the Bible first, and then at first it seems like you put the Bible first, and initially you wonder, well, am I interpreting it right? I don't really know how to apply it. But if you do that through Bible stories and through the Word of God in its literal written form, eventually everything in your life falls into place and you know where it goes. One of the biggest problems for young people until you get to my age is to know where you're at compared to where you should be, where you're at in life, to know how to navigate this world, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The Bible has something to say about how to navigate everything. And the Bible, if you put the Bible first, you're going to find out how it blesses you. The first thing I want to point out is, in a way, in America, in Western culture, we're all like slaves to some extent. We don't fully own our real estate. You don't really own your home. You don't really own your farm. You do, but if you don't pay taxes, they're going to take it from you. Okay? So in a way, you're leasing from the government. Why we do that is very simple. Because the government gives us protection of a police force so we don't get robbed. And they give us protection from enemies, foreign enemies that could come. Imagine a foreign kingdom come and they could take your farm or your house if they conquered you. So it's a good trade-off. So don't complain about paying your taxes. And Jesus, he said, when the Jewish people were complaining about paying the Roman tax, he said, show me a penny. And of course they showed him one. He said, whose inscription's on it? Well, our penny's got Abraham Lincoln. He was a former president of the United States. Well, theirs had Caesar, the current ruling king of Rome. And he said, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. What he's really saying was, okay, think about that, right? You're using Caesar's money. You're operating in his world and under his protection. Render him what's due to him, because his image is on the coin. But I got a question for you. Whose image are you in? God's image. So render unto God yourself. Okay? You're made in the image of God. But Samuel, back in 1 Samuel 8, this is before David was king, before Saul was anointed king. This was back when the land of Israel had no king. The Israelites were clamoring for a king because they wanted somebody to stand up for them to fight their enemies. This was the time during the book of the Judges when the Israelites would fall into sin. God would allow their enemies to overthrow them, and the Israelites would eventually, a ruler would rise within their country that would deliver them, with God's help, deliver them from their enemies. But they kind of got sick and tired of falling into sin and being, attacked by their enemies, and they didn't have a king to go fight for them. And I can understand why they wanted a king. Okay? But this is what Samuel said to them. And he was a prophet, and God told him to say this. Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. And he said, this is what the king who will reign over you will do. He will take your sons and make them serve in his army with his chariots and horses, and they will run in front of his chariots. Some he will assign to be commanders, and others will be assigned to wield his weapons, or to plow his ground, or to reap his harvest, or to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be confectionaries and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants. He'll take a tenth of your grain and of your vintage, that's your wine and grapes, and give it to his officials and his attendants. Your men servants and maid servants and the best of your cattle and donkeys he will take to use as his own. He will take a tenth of your flocks, and finally you will yourselves end up being slave-like servants to him. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, and the Lord will not answer you in that day. But the people refused to listen to Samuel. No, they said, we want a king over us. Then we will be like the other nations with a king to lead us and go out before us and fight our battles. There's a progression in the land of Israel. There's a progression in every culture, every kingdom. They go through a period of the culture rises to prominence, plateaus, and then falls into oblivion. Okay, only one culture that God said, only one culture in history God said that would happen to, but he would call them back, and that's Israel. Israel's the only culture in entire world history that rose to prominence, fell, and actually was wiped out as God had prophesied, but who came back as the same people and the same religion. The only culture in history, because God said, this I will do so that the whole world will know that I am the Lord. For our practical use, that rise, plateau, and fall is going to happen in the United States. We're not Israel. We're not under special protection. Okay? We have our kings, and everything that we just read, that's where our taxes go. And notice, okay, if you notice, the tax rate in Israel was supposed to be 10%. What's ours?
Like 30.
Yeah. Okay? We're worse off. Okay? And it's getting worse. You're going to see. We don't have much time, okay? But I'm going to give you a brief history, key points of the history of Western civilization. You won't realize till you're older how important this information is, and it puts everything into perspective. We're going to begin with Rome. That's not where Western civilization began, but for my key point talk, we're beginning with Rome. There was a thing called the Pax Romana. That means Roman peace. It was the 200-year golden era of Roman world rule and universal prosperity. Rome ruled with a rod of iron. Why was there so much prosperity? Well, here's why. Because back in those days, and actually in any day, any culture, this can happen, but when you have warring tribes, warring factions, the reason that you want a king is to protect you from war. Protect you from being raided. Somebody could come and steal your farm, your children, your family, your cattle. You want protection. Well, back during the days of Rome, the reason that Rome rose to such prominence was because of their very, very strict discipline and very harsh punishments, particularly in the military. Nobody could beat the Roman army in battle. There were what was called the barbarian hordes. They were tribes of groups of Germanic peoples in Europe areas that were not part of Rome, mainly from the northern areas. And it would include like people like the Vikings, the Norsemen, Attila the Hun in the east, Genghis Khan. Okay, those people were not part of the Roman Empire. The Roman army protected populations and cities that were under Rome, protected them from being raided. Imagine if you were a small city that could be raided by a barbarian horde that maybe they lived 200, 300 miles away, but they rode on horseback and they were all trained warriors. They'd conquer your land. They'd take everything from your farm, everything from your house, steal your children into slavery, and probably burn your house and maybe leave you for dead. How much better was it, and how much better would it be when Rome would come and conquer your territory, and they'd say, look, yeah, we're going to conquer you and you have no choice about it, but here's what you're going to get. You're going to get our protection because we're civilized. We have a very, very strict militaristic army that's going to protect you, very strict rules and laws. You're going to have to pay us pretty high taxes, exorbitant taxes, taxes that you're going to hate to pay. In fact, you're going to have to pay such taxes that maybe we come around every 2 years, every 3, every 4 years, whatever it is, when the tax man comes, you're probably not going to have the money. You might have to sell one of your children into slavery just to pay your taxes, okay? And you're going to hate it. You're going to cry because you're going to lose your child, maybe even 2 children, okay? Or maybe you have to sell half your herd of animal just to pay us. And we're going to demand it of you. But guess what? You don't lose everything like you would if you were raided by a foreign army. You don't lose all your children. You get to keep your life. And that's what Pax Romana was. It was a blessing. The Romans were a blessing to a large swath of territory that had been previously overrun by the barbarian hordes that fought amongst themselves, tribes that fought amongst themselves. The Roman class had 3 classes. It had Roman citizens. The Roman class system had 3 classes: Roman citizens, freemen, and slaves. Okay? Roman citizens early on did not have to pay taxes. The freemen had to pay taxes. The slaves had nothing. They did not have to pay taxes because they didn't own anything. And when you were a slave in Rome, you were a real slave. You had almost no rights whatsoever. Okay? The only thing that they couldn't do is they couldn't kill you for no cause. But if they had suspected you of crimes, they could torture you and even kill you. Okay? You didn't have any rights as a slave. Why Rome could operate this way and have this class distinction that nobody challenged was, as I mentioned, it was the iron-like centralized control, the discipline of the Roman army, the discipline of the Roman soldiers, and of everything down from the policemen, the magistrates, the jailers. If you read Acts 16, it's the story of the Philippian jailer. Philippi was a Roman territory. Paul and Silas were in prison for preaching the gospel because their preaching caused an uproar in the population. And the population were generally idol worshipers and people that made their money. You know, religion's big business. It's always been big business. It still is. That will never change. Okay? But just because people misuse religion, I'm going to tell you this right now. Just because people misuse religion doesn't mean religion's false. The same way that there's principles of buoyancy that if you build a boat that's airtight and watertight, it will float. That's a principle. If somebody, and it can take you from one continent to another. Let's say somebody has a nice boat. Principles. They followed the Bible and they made a nice boat. Right? If God told you how to make a boat. But then the people get in it and the guy driving the boat takes them to the wrong destination. They all become slaves. Well, there's a guy who just misused the principles that are true. Does that make those principles not true? The answer is no. The principles are still true. The boat still floats if you make it and build it correctly because the principle of buoyancy doesn't change even though somebody misused it. So just because people misuse religion doesn't mean that religion is false. Well, the Philippian jailer in Philippi, all the people in this city were basically, they worshiped idols. And they supported through their monetary system because of the type, some of it's corruption. You worship so-and-so, we can make silver images of your gods and you buy them, you got to pay a little bit more, but you're paying more because it's an act of worship. So they made money off that. Paul and Silas interrupted that profit making. And so many people were upset because they're losing their profits. They got put in prison. Well, when the angel of the Lord came and delivered them from prison, all the prison cells opened up miraculously. If you read the story, you remember the Philippian jailer was a going to kill himself. And the reason was because under Roman rule, if you were a jailer and your detainees or your prisoners escaped, you had to suffer the same fate that they would have. And some of the prisoners were murderers that he held, so he'd have been killed by the Roman army. So he was just going to kill himself so they didn't torture him to death. Okay, but that's the discipline we're talking about. We're talking about such discipline that these guys would never, ever, ever forget to lock a gate. Everything's done perfectly. They double check, triple check everything. Because if you don't, you're going to end up in big, big trouble. That is fully half of what made Rome the culture and the dominant culture that it was, and why they could operate with slaves, and why the Roman citizens could live and actually not fearing slaves. They didn't have to fear reprisal, fear uprising. And towards the end of the empire, there were uprisings. But initially, all of that control and that discipline makes the culture superior. Also, as time went on, Rome, this discipline degraded. Okay, and this is what you're seeing in the United States also. You're seeing a degrading in our discipline. In Rome, initially it was the Romans, the Italians, like the Italian band the Bible talks about. They were the soldiers. As time went on, Romans didn't want to be soldiers anymore. They said, we'll just pay somebody to fight for us. And so they paid different groups of people, and they were called the mercenaries. And then as Rome degraded further, because people you're paying to fight for you are not going to fight the same way as your own countrymen. And then you got to pay them more. Eventually, you got to tax the population, and that's what happened. So Rome degraded from iron-like centralized control to having to use mercenaries to taxation, and eventually Rome collapsed. But there was 200 years. It's actually a lot longer than 200 years that Rome lasted. But 200 years of unparalleled, unchallenged success. Rome actually, I think, lasted 1,000 years. Don't quote me on that, I can't remember. But it was a long time that Rome was a power. A lot longer than many, many, many other cultures. And it was because of their discipline. Now we're going to fast forward to Europe in the Middle Ages. After Rome fell, basically, and disbanded in the East and the Western kingdoms, Europe sort of was given over to kings and to Western arm of the Catholic Church until the Protestants started. What you had in Europe in the Middle Ages after the Roman Empire, again, you had warring factions of like France didn't get along with England, and they didn't get along with Portugal, they didn't get along with Spain. So there, I just named 4 countries that had kings that would sometimes fight one another. Sometimes, and in fact, more often than not, they would not declare war, but they would use pirates, okay, as terrorist groups. The pirates that hold out or hide it out in England weren't allowed to raid English ships, but they could go raid Spanish ships and French ships. And they could run back to England. And then the French would and the Spanish would cry to the King of England, "You're harboring pirates." And he'd say, "No pirates here." Okay? That happens today. We're not talking about that, but just know that happens today. You try to figure out how that happens today. Okay? That's called conspiracies. Secret armies, secret deals, behind the scenes. It happened back then, it happens now. But in that feudal system, there were 4 main classes of people. There was royalty, landowners, serfs, and clerics. Clerics were the clergymen. The royalty and the landowners would have loved to not even have to have the clerics, because the real truth of the matter is the royalty and landowners, by and large, because they're wealthy. What does the Bible say about rich man? It's harder for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than for a rich man to come to repentance. Okay? Rich people don't seek God because they're satisfied and they got everything, all their bases are covered. It's the serfs that seek God. And how do royalty and landowners keep serfs from stealing from them? Religion, okay? Tell these serfs, look, you clerics, we love the Catholic Church, because here's what you're going to do. You're going to tell these serfs that their reward's in heaven, their reward's in the next life. And they're not lying. That's what the Bible says, truly. It's not a lie. If all you care about is this life, you love religion, not because for the next life. You don't care whether there's a God or not, but you love religion because religion's going to keep those poor people from stealing from you, even if they're starving to death. Okay? You love religion. You're going to support it. You see that today. I'm not going to go into how, but it's how people use the Islamic religion right now. This is very kind of political talk. Religion, let me tell you, the handlers of this country know what I'm telling you very, very well, and they use it. Okay? They've done it since Bible times. They've done it since the Europe in the Middle Ages. But it does not negate the truth of the Bible. Just remember, just because the Bible can help tell serfs to respect and honor their king and honor their leaders, okay? Because the Bible does say that. And it's not just the King James Version that says that. It's the Bible in its original language. Why? Because the king, no matter how corrupt he is, no matter how corrupt the system is, it's still better than you being subject to raiding parties that could slaughter everybody in your village. Even if we had to pay 50% taxes. Even if we had to pay 80% taxes. Hope not. But if we're still left with whatever we're left with, that we can feed ourselves, okay? God says you honor your rulers. Now, if you can use political means to change the scenario and change it up to be a little bit more fair, by all means do it. But it's not your savior, okay? Because remember what Samuel said, in the end, after the king does all this, you will end up like slaves. Every single culture, every single country in the world that happens to their population, the U.S. is no different. We're headed towards that right now, okay? I'll explain why in a bit, but just understand, you're going to see why there is no making America great again. The only way you could make America great again would be if the entire country fell on their face before God, okay, and became moral at their own personal expense, okay? It's not going to happen for many reasons. Even biblically, I'll tell you why it's not going to happen, okay? Ultimately, Samuel predicted how it's going to go when you have rulers, okay? It's going to go the way it always does. They're going to take from your family. They're going to take from your work, take from your lands, okay? And eventually, you're going to end up basically like indentured servants. But in Europe in the Middle Ages, serfs had some legal rights. For their entire lives, they were bound to the land owned by the landowner, but they could not be bought or sold between landowners, so families couldn't be broken up. Serfs were even granted small plots of land to use for housing and for personal sustenance. And sometimes they were even allowed to earn certain small plots of land to pass it on to their children. But generally, serfs were a step above slaves. They weren't exactly slaves because slaves could be bought and sold. Slaves couldn't depend on even having a family. Serfs could. Religion held the system together because you weren't really paying the serfs. You know, how did serfs get paid? Little land to make their own food. Okay? In American slavery, okay, in chattel slavery, in the, you know, if this was the year 1800, you had slavery in the South in this country. What does the slave owner have to supply his population of slaves? Food, clothing, and shelter. Pretty much, that's all serfs got, was food, clothing, and shelter. The one thing that they got, actually got two things different that was better than being a slave. And the one thing was the ability to have families because they couldn't be bought or sold. And they could own over time if they earned it or awarded it for doing some great deeds to help somebody. Maybe they saved the landowner's son's life. They would be granted a reward of a piece of land. The Crusades happened during this time, and what the Crusades did, very interestingly, it was the birth of Western banking and of the Freemasons. And I'm going to go into this. This is an important little. So this is a new little section. This is the birth of Western banking began with the Crusades, and here's how that happened. At the time of the Middle Ages, you had the Roman Catholic Church had basically taken over power of Rome. That's why it's called the Roman Catholic Church. As Rome degraded into basically debauchery and all kinds of immorality, that also degraded into fraud and public thieving. A society cannot survive that. So it imploded on its own. And at the time, the emperor, or I'm not going to say the emperor, but the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church filled the void of that was basically left by the emperor being absent. What happened is Attila the Hun was raiding Roman territories, and the Roman armies could not stop him. It's a long story about how these guys could use the short bow, riding on full gallop on a horseback, and they could hit, at 100 yards, not 100 yards, but like 100 feet, they could hit, a target dead on, and their arrows or special bows could pierce Roman armor. Nobody could beat Attila the Hun, especially not mercenaries who weren't willing to die for Rome because they're not actually Roman citizens. So what happened is the emperor lost power. At one point, the Pope had an audience with Attila the Hun and said, hey, what do you want? Attila the Hun, here's what he wanted. Rome always called him a barbarian. So he wanted a royal bride so he could be, sophisticated, and he wanted to get paid off. So the Catholic Church, the Pope, gave him a royal bride and paid him off. Ever since then, Rome was controlled by the Catholic Church and the Pope. And for many, many years, the Catholic Church and the Pope actually conscripted an army and taxed the population. Even today, even though Maximilian, overthrew the Pope, but even today, there's still a little country called Vatican City that we have every major country in the world has an ambassador to the Vatican. Why? Because it's like a country. And by the way, they still print their own coinage. So when Bible prophecy talks about Rome in the future, and all these secular people want to say, Bible can't be right because Rome's gone. No, it's not. Okay? Rome's still around. It's very small and weak right now. But it's still around, and it's going to gain a lot of power in the coming days during the tribulation when it unites with the Antichrist. Okay? Because the Antichrist is going to be just like these people. Satan knows how important religion is, and he's going to want the religions of the world to back him. Okay? And that's when the Catholic Church comes to prominence again. And if you don't believe me, this is just crazy unbelievable. The Pope, the current sitting Pope, has basically come out to say, never said before because it's complete and utter damnable heresy, but he's come out to say, well, there's many ways to God. Okay? Okay? Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh to the Father but by me. And for many, many years, the Catholic Church backed that statement up until today. But why is the Pope saying this? Because he thinks that God wants peace at the expense of his son. What did Jesus say? He says, think I've come, you know what? I don't know exactly where it is, but Jesus said, think I've come to bring peace to the world? Nay, I've come to bring a sword, because I will set father against son, mother against brother against brother. For my sake, you will be hated. Okay, why does God want war? No, he doesn't want war. But what does the Bible say about the earth? It says that Satan is the prince and power of the air. Why? Because people are more concerned with, the general population of every single country is more concerned with their current physical wants and needs than they are concerned with spiritual things. And that puts them at variance with anybody who puts God first. Okay? For that reason, you don't seek peace as the primary thing. You seek to live peaceably with all men, putting God first. What the Pope is currently doing is he's setting God on the side and putting peace first. It's a damnable, hellish thing that he's doing. Let me just tell you, it is that, and the fact that the Catholic Church and for years and years, their astronomers, the Catholic priests who were astronomers, accepted that there were aliens. Okay, I'm not going to extraterrestrials. Those two things, the fact that the Catholic Church is putting peace, world peace, before Jesus Christ, and because they accept that there is the existence of extraterrestrials, those 2 points are going to lead the Catholic Church down the path to helping usher in Antichrist. I'm not going into that today. I would love to, and I will another time. But just know that that's happening. The East and the West, the Catholic Church had divided after the Pope ran Rome for years and years and years. There became a rift between the Eastern Catholics and the Western Catholics. And the Eastern became the Byzantine Empire, and the West remained in Rome as the current Pope. During this time, the Islam started to take over the territories in around Turkey and Asia Minor, and started make incursions into the Byzantine Empire. And let me just tell you that the Muslim form of fighting, while it wasn't quite as disciplined as the Roman army was, the Islamic rulers were able to convince their Muslim fighters that if they died in battle, they went straight to a type of heaven where they had 99 virgins, okay, waiting to please their every desire. So they felt like if they could die in battle, they would go to heaven and be surrounded and have, unlimited sexual desires. Okay, well, if that's really true, why wouldn't you want to die for that, right? And the Muslim armies became horribly feared for their ferocity of fighting and the fact that they wouldn't back down. And they were conquering the East. The Byzantine Empire called upon the Western Roman Catholics to say, hey, we're the Eastern Orthodox, you're the Western, but you better help us fight these people, because don't think they'll stop in the East. And the way they're using Islam and the religion, not just was the Islamic people using the idea of a heavenly place where 99 virgins were. They're using the idea of the Jewish people, and the Bible, the Christian Bible, says one thing. It says that a Messiah will rule and reign from Israel, and we say something else. So we're coming after the land of Israel. And not the Romans, but the Islamic people used religion to get their people to fight. And they did fight. And the Byzantines rulers and the Roman Catholic rulers, whether or not they really cared about Jerusalem, Because really, to believe it or not, the Catholic doctrine didn't care that much about Jerusalem. Catholic doctrine said that all the Bible prophecy is allegorical, that the church replaced Israel, so that's why the Pope rides around, sometimes they carry him on a golden chair with a crown on his head, because he's the vicar of Christ, or he's the substitute for Christ. Christ the King over his church, not over a future Israel. But what the Catholic leaders and the Eastern Orthodox leaders, remember the Catholic Church had split into Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Catholics, what they were deathly afraid of was losing their power and their money. And they thought, how are we going to get these royalty, these kings and these landowners to fund an army to save our butts? And how are we going to get the serfs to fight in our armies to conquer the Islamics? Well, they focused on Jerusalem. Trust me, right now, there's a focus on Jerusalem. Okay? And it's not really what you think. Okay? It's an artificially created problem for an ulterior motive, the same way that this was. The Crusades publicly thought to save Jerusalem from the Muslims. What it was really fought for, save our way of life, that our ability to be the kings and the power brokers of the West. That's the real reason the Crusades were fought. And the generals, the serfs and the landowners and the sons of the landowners that wanted to make a name for themselves and become knights and become knighted in the military, they knew the game. They knew what it was about. But war is big business. It was back then and it is now. And what you had when you had the Crusaders, here's what you had. When you have a war going on, you have to feed the army. You have to have tools so they can build bridges to cross rivers, and they need weapons. Where's all that money come from? Comes from the landowners. Serfs don't have any money. The king doesn't want to pay. He has to increase taxes from the landowners, and they're cussing out the system because they got to pay more, but they know what they're really doing is they're paying to save their own skin because there's a real enemy, okay? And this real enemy isn't going away. The generals of the Crusades understood that all this money from the landowners, here's what would happen initially. The donations all went to the Catholic Church. The clerics all they talked about was, we need to fight for Jerusalem, every church service. The serfs are like, yeah, okay, to get me out of I could go see the world and hopefully not get killed. And I'm going to fight for God. And the landowners are like, well, we got to support them, okay, because if we don't, the Muslims could take our lands from us. And the royalty did too. And the money funneled to the Catholic Church, who funneled it to the generals to run the army. Well, guess what? The generals found out that, man, we're getting rich because we got all this money and there's nobody standing over us telling us what to spend it on. Okay? Yeah, we're going to fight the wars, but we don't really want to win. We want to keep this war going because it's our livelihood. It gives us power and it gives us money. And for years, okay, I don't know how many, was there 3 crusades or 4? I can't remember how many there was, okay? Sometimes the Muslims seem to win, sometimes the Christians, okay? Remember this. The secularists will tell you, oh, the crusades, that just proves that the religion is bad for the world. Look how many people died in the crusades. Well, hey, man, not that many people died in the crusades. Way more people died under communist dictatorships than ever would die in the crusades. But the crusades were not religious wars. They just used religion as an excuse to stay rich and to control the population. And the leaders and the military leaders all knew it. And this was the birth of what's called the middle class. See, when you had royalty, landowners, serfs, and clerics, those 4 classes of people, where's the middle class? There's no middle class in feudal Europe. But there is. there is a very small middle class. You know who they'd be? They'd be your artisans, your artists, your brick makers, the smiths, the iron workers. They're the trained, skilled workers that had the wherewithal and the money to be able to have tools. Even if you're a serf and you wanted and you could learn ironworking, okay? And you did learn ironworking, and that was your serfdom job, not dumb job, but your serfdom job or your serf-like job. You could not have your own shop because you were never, ever, ever on purpose, never, ever, ever paid enough to buy your own tools. They didn't want you to ever own your own shop or have your own tools. You're only always ever working for the landowner. Okay? But the skilled artisans, because if they did a really good job, they'd get paid better. They'd actually get paid more than just daily sustenance. And that was a very, very, very small middle class. It was a subclass of people in this population. Right now, our middle class has been the biggest group of people in the United States. That is changing. Let me just tell you, the middle class is going away. We're going to find out why. We're not going to have a middle class. Okay? We're going back to this. That's a very harsh prophecy I just said. Remember how we got to where we're at, where we came from? Remember? It's the culture rises, then it falls. We came from that. We got a middle class and prosperity, and we're going back to this. Okay? But I'm jumping ahead of myself. Lest I do that, what the military leaders and the generals did was they started saying, well, sending letters back home and sending the wounded people back home. Hey, you're sending all this money to the Catholic Church, and it's coming to us, but the Catholics are taking their cut. The Pope's taking his cut. You could take a little bit better care of your son Joey out here, or Isaac, or whatever his name is, if you sent the money directly to us. Don't send it to the Catholic Church, all of it. Send directly. The next group of conscripts that come out, send them with some gold and silver. It'll take care of them and your people better. We'll take care of your people from your village better than other ones. For whatever you supply, 1,000%, of course that happened. Okay? That made the generals even more wealthy over time. And it made them so wealthy, and the Catholic Church got so upset that that was taking place, that eventually the Catholic army attacked and fought against the crusading knights. Okay? They were called the Knights Templar at that time. They fought against them only because they started taking the donations, using religion and then corrupting it away from the religious people. Okay? It's ingenious. All right? Ingenious, guys. Here's what happened. The Catholic army from the Pope's army was able to beat them. And I cannot remember the city and town it happened in, but they were trying to find where they had their gold. And they tortured these guys so hard, like it was the most horrendous, slow burning their feet off, okay, to forms of torture. These guys, the second they were let alone, ran on their stumps and threw themselves off the edge of the castle because it was horrendous what was happening to them. And by then, the money and the gold had been long gone and long hidden, okay? And what ended up happening to it, here's what happened to that money. The Knights Templar went underground, but the one thing that they had learned in war, and they had taught the serfs how to build. You had to build bridges. You had to build barracks. The stone workers were known as masons. And the Knights Templar went underground. They said, well, there's no more Knights Templar, so the Catholic Church can't find us. We're just masons. We're just humble masons. They didn't live in small little brick-built houses, huts. Okay? Some of them were super rich, hiding money. But they kept it under wraps. And here's what they did. Okay? In order to keep the population down, the landowners and the kings had a pact: never, ever, ever lend money to serfs. If you do, they just might want to become a landowner and challenge you. Never even let them own tools to buy. Never lend them money to buy tools. Well, what they did is they focused on a passage in the Bible. There's a passage in the Bible that God told the Jews, and we're going to get to that after a while, where God told the Jewish people that they were not allowed to charge interest of fellow Jews. If they were supposed to lend money to help people get tools in Jewish culture, but you were never, ever, ever to charge interest for it. And the Catholic Church, during this feudal time, along with the kings, made it a law of the land that you could not charge interest. It's a jailable offense. You can't lend money. The real reason was they didn't want the serfs having anything, okay? But the fake reason, the moral justification was, we serve God in the Bible, and the Bible says don't lend money for interest. True, but the Bible said give the money and let them pay it back at no interest. The Bible didn't say you can't lend money. You understand me, folks? Okay. They're crooked, they're going against the Bible, but they're using the Bible to support what they want. Well, what the Freemasons did with this money that they had was they started lending money to serfs to build businesses and to buy tools. And they could not lend them money at interest, but they lent them money with loan origination fees that they paid off over time, just like interest. Same thing. But no, it's not interest. We're just charging you for the effort that it took us and the risk we're taking to give you this loan. That was the birth of banking in the Western civilization and the birth of the middle class. The middle class took off after that. Look at what Exodus and Leviticus and Ezekiel say. God told the Jews, if you lend money to any of my people that is poor by thee, thou shalt not be to him as a usurer, or that means an interest gatherer. Neither shalt thou lay upon him an interest charge. Usury is an interest charge. If you at all take your neighbor's clothing as a pledge, you shall deliver it unto him by the time the sun goes down. If thy brother be waxen poor, if he becomes poor and falls into decay, then thou shalt relieve him. Yea, though he be a stranger or a traveler, that he may live with thee. Take no interest of him or increase. Don't profit off of his suffering because he has to borrow from you. You give it to him. You can take a pledge from him. Like, okay, he wants to borrow $20 or $100. Fine. Well, you can take his coat to hold it as collateral, but in the evening you have to give that back to him. Okay? Thou shalt not give thy money unto usury, or that means unto interest, nor lend him thy victuals or thy provisions for any profit. Okay? That is how God wants his people to operate amongst themselves. In the church, if somebody needs money and you're a wealth-off person, you do not lend it for increase or lend it for interest. They can pay it back. You don't have to give it to them, but you don't charge interest. And in fact, there's other parts of the Word of God that basically say it's not good to be a lender anyway, meaning to say you have to pay me back. The best way to do it is if you have it, you can give it to someone and say, look, pay me back if you can. Because I'm going to tell you, most of the time, I've been alive for 61 years. Maybe not most, but half the time you lend somebody money, they end up detesting you that they have to pay it back. Okay? You lend somebody money, they end up detesting you. You lose a friend. You lend money, you lose a friend. Okay? Give it to them. Tell them, look, I'd like you to pay it back, but if you don't, it's okay. And then never lend it to them again. Okay? But it's just a little word of advice. Ezekiel says, if any hath given forth upon usury, means if any charge interest, this is how serious of a crime it is in God's eyes, and hath taken increase, he hath done all these abominations, he shall surely die, and his blood shall be upon him. It's a capital, in the Bible, it was a capital offense to charge your fellow man interest, and it's what banks do every day. Okay? Now remember, we honor our kings because so I just told you the Bible's giving you the ideal, and it's telling you what you should do in a godly culture. Once you're past the godly culture and you've accepted that you need kings and that they're going to print currency and you're going to have to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, you're also going to be taxed. You're also then going to keep taxing you as corruption, and they get hungry and hungry and hungry, and government keeps getting bigger. Eventually, your culture is going to implode. It's inevitable. Don't fight. You can try to. I'm not saying don't fight against it, meaning don't try to elect. You should try to elect fiscal conservative people into power if you want your country to last. But eventually, the spenders, and that's one of the reasons why the Republicans, they're called conservative. Democrats spend, okay, they're the spenders supposedly. The Republicans are supposedly the conservative ones. But the real truth of the matter is, I hate to tell you folks, the Republicans are just as crooked at the top as the Democrats. I could give you examples. I'm not here for this is not a political talk. This is Bible first, politics second is what this is. Money lending and the national debt in the United States. The Federal Reserve banks are structured like private corporations. Member banks earn dividends from holding stock in the banks. I'm not going to... The system of money creation is very, very complicated. They've made it complicated on purpose. It's very hard to try to understand it. All I'm going to focus on is the national debt, because that's really where our major concern is. Okay. The interest payments on the national debt right now equate to about 2% of the total amount of money that is owed. Okay. Here's how the national debt works. The government needs money to fund itself. So it goes to the Treasury and tells the Treasury Department how much it needs. The Treasury Department is what taxes the population. It runs the IRS, and it also funds the government. We've been running a deficit for a long time, but it's not a big deal, they say, because the Treasury Department basically borrows money from the Fed. Really what it does is it borrows money from the general population who got it from the Fed. It's complicated to go into, but they sell bond security bonds, basically treasury bonds they're IOUs that we're going to pay you back. Yeah, we ran a deficit this year, whatever billions it is. We need to raise that money. We're going to borrow from the public, borrow from China, from India, any country that'll buy our bonds, great. When that country buys the bonds, the Treasury Department gets what they paid for it into their coffers, and they can use that and they spend it. The problem is that whatever the interest rates that are set by the Federal Reserve, that's what the U.S. government has to pay those interest rates off. A lot of that is owed to U.S. citizens because U.S. citizens can buy Treasury bonds. What we're told is it's not a big deal because the money's pretty much owed to us anyway. In fact, they say it's a good thing because you can invest. It's how you invest. Yeah, it's a good thing as long as the government can make its interest payments. Okay? Once the government can't make its interest payments, the country's insolvent. Okay, we're really, really close to being insolvent. And anybody that tells you it's not a big deal, they're completely lying. Okay, let me explain how it is. Okay, currently, I forgot, I didn't fill it in but the interest payments in national debt currently equate to about 2% of everything that's owed. So that's actually really, It's actually, when you really think about it, it's low. It's a low percentage for everything that's owed. The problem is the government is not paying down the principal at all. They're just paying the interest payments. You understand what I just said? If you're just paying the interest payments, every year you run a deficit, your debt balloons and you have to pay interest on more debt. Okay? Here's how bad it is. The U.S. government is projected to spend $892 billion on interest payments in the fiscal year 2024, which is 14% of total federal spending. This is a 32% increase from 2023, when the government spent $659 billion on interest. 1 year, a 32% hike? Okay? Here's how it equates to tax revenue, or how it relates to tax revenue. The amount of tax revenue, that means that of all the taxes that the Treasury Department collects through the IRS, that goes to pay interest on the national debt, the amount of tax revenue that goes just to pay the interest, not the principal, year by year has been growing at an alarming rate. Now, it varies as to how much it grows, and maybe 1 year it might even fall a little bit, okay? But other years it takes such a big hike that overall it climbs, okay? In 2023, interest payments on the national debt were approximately 18 to 20% of all tax revenue. As of April 2024, 39% of U.S. tax revenue will go toward paying the interest on the national debt. You see that bump? At the current rate, we got like 3 years left before the system implodes. You can't continue that. 3 years for what? Well, they could. Here's how they could extend it. People will say, "Well, yeah, but they could." Yeah, but you know how they extend it? Inflation, pay back cheaper dollars. Okay, drive up. Have your money's worth less in your savings account and everything. It's basically, inflation is a hidden tax on all the population of the people that are good people that save money. Okay, all right, and it's all because why? It's all mainly because the bankers want to charge interest. God said no. Here it is. Up, up, up. Plateau, down. How far down are we? Okay? There is no... Anybody that tells you, well, we owe it to ourselves, like Ronald Reagan said. Okay? I got a video in here that basically tells you why we elect buffoons as our leaders. Because our leaders are not our leaders. They're just our figureheads. Okay? I don't want to go into it all too much, but I'm supposed to honor our leaders. Okay? Why? Because somewhere along the line, my forefathers asked for a king. You understand? So did yours. We're getting what we bargained for. And there's no way around it. Okay? This comes out and says it. A research fellow in the Heritage Foundation, okay, the Grover M. Harriman Center for the Federal Budget. These are people that actually care about the country. The title of the article, the first line is, American taxpayers are now slaves to interest payment. What did Samuel say? You'll end up slaves. We're there. Sorry, folks. Sorry, Americans. We're there. Okay, according to this. And now, okay, it's past April, okay, of 2024. And the interest on the federal debt is now so immense that it's consuming 40% of all personal income taxes. That's not going to any programs. It's going just to pay interest, not the principal. And so your deficit that year grows the principal, and then your interest payments are higher. Okay, we have inflation. And it's not at all keeping up. You understand? We'd need I don't know what the figure would be. We need 5 times the inflation we have to stay even. Okay? Or maybe not 5 times, maybe twice, double. I don't know. But if you, so this starts a new section. Okay, now what we're going to talk about is, if you have money in savings, or if you own property, you're going to get arrested for a felony. and what you own will be confiscated. Okay, if you Americans that are listening to me, if you own property, you have a bank account, okay, that has a sizable amount in it. You own 2 cars, more than 1 car, you're going to get arrested sooner or later, and your wealth is going to be confiscated. Why? Because the government's not going to let poor people starve when they can't fund the government. History shows in the West, it happened in Argentina, most recently, Venezuela. You got 2 houses, you're coughing up 1. Okay, we're not letting you be rich, even if you earned it. We're going to give it to the poor so they don't starve. And by the way, we know how you made that money anyway, because you made it by being crooks. And we know because we caught Donald Trump, your king, cheating all over the place. In fact, he's convicted of felonies, and that we're signaling to you, and he's convicted of tax fraud, and we're signaling to you, American, who has money, how we're going to come after you. Same way we did him. Okay? What? You don't like it? What, you want to be overrun by the Chinese? We at least got a military. We're going to let you stay in one little house somewhere. But eventually, yeah, you're kind of going to have to be like a serf, right? Because serfs didn't own anything, but they were happy. Have you heard that saying before? Yeah, Klaus von Schwab of the European Monetary Fund or the World Monetary Fund and the World Economic Forum. He said that, yeah, the general population in the West won't own anything, but they'll be happy. Why? Because they're going to be serfs. And he told me what's going to happen. And if you think, why is it going to happen? Can't we fight against it? The answer is no, and here's why. Because the Chinese system of total totalitarian control and mass invasive, pervasive surveillance is superior to free enterprise. I will repeat that. In the past, our enemies have been the communist Cold War dictatorships. They were so corrupt that the level of corruption in the West was not to the level of the communists. And our business was more honest, more straightworthy. You could do business on a handshake, and your country can run because people do what they're supposed to do. Well, along comes China that monitors everything. You don't have one single person in China that's cheating the system. One single person that's getting disability when he's not supposed to, because cameras are going to see him out there playing football with his buddies. Oh, you're getting disability? You played football? You're going to prison. Okay? We're not just taking your money. You're going to prison. Okay? China, the World Economic Forum praised the Chinese system because it is not going to be beat by the West. They're going to rule us if we don't implement totalitarian control ourselves. And I mean mass total control to where the government is in your bedroom and they know everything you're doing using AI to enforce morality. Because Americans got away from the Bible. You get away from the Bible, you lose your moral standing. You lose your moral footing, just like Rome became immoral, down. United States, immoral, down. China, Chairman Mao of the Chinese Party in China, before AI, he said, morality begins at the end of a rifle. What did he mean by that? Here's what he meant. You cheat in China. You know that in China, if you get convicted of, say, drug offense, that's a cap offense, they're gonna take your life and they're gonna shoot you, and they send the bill for the bullet to your family. Okay? I'm serious. They're enforcing morality at the end of the rifle, and it's making them prosperous. Okay? Our system, the Western system, can't compete. Why? We're still way ahead of the game a little bit just because of our military and our naval power, our air power. I'm not going to go into that. That all involves the Middle East war and what I told you about how they use religion. We're not going into it right now, but it's buying us time, okay? It's buying us time. But we better accept and embrace AI into our lives for two reasons. One, if we don't, we're going to be slaves to China, okay? And if we accept it, we're going to be slaves to our own leaders, okay? I've watched the video in China. Literally, there's a video. You can pull this up. This is one of the saddest videos you will ever see. It's called 2-Year-Old Gets Run Over by Truck. I wish I was playing it right now, but it's very sad. There's this video in a back alley in China. A young lady, a young mother, got up early in the morning to go shopping for her food, and she's shopping the shops of the back alley. Her little 2-year-old girl gets separated from her. A truck's coming down the alleyway. Now remember, in China, everything you're doing is timed. Everything you're doing is watched. This guy can't even stop to go to the bathroom without it costing him. He sees a little girl on the side of the road. Does he bother to take the time to get out of his delivery truck and move the little 2-year-old? No. What he does is he hopes the little girl gets the message when he bumps into her with his 2-ton truck. He bumps into the 2-year-old. The little girl totters, falls under his front wheel. The guy doesn't get out of his truck. He figures, the little girl's gone. Well, he goes forward and he thuds over the little girl's legs, crushing her legs almost to her pelvis. Little girl starts screaming. You can see the guy and the truck driver on the video. He's like, oh my God, what did I just do? Does he get out to move the girl? No, he takes off and runs over the girl with his back tires. Okay? It's unbelievable when you watch this video. He takes off. They did not get his license plate. Here's where it gets unbelievable. Massively unbelievable. This is a video that's there to protect the businesses and make sure everybody does what they're supposed to do. When the Buddhist culture, everybody, you know what the first tenet of Buddhism is? First tenet of Buddhism is life is suffering. Mind your own business. What happens in this culture? You watch this video, you can count them. There's about 10 to 12 people walk by or drive by on bicycles. They look at the little girl laying in the road and they don't do anything. Another truck comes by. He sees the little girl lying in the road, just runs her over. They got his license plate. He's doing life in prison. Okay? Can you believe this? And then still, nobody moves the little girl until you know who moves her? It's after about the 14th person that walks by. The garbage street collector, a young lady who's a garbage street collector. What does that tell you? She's a street collector. In their system, they have a social class system that's built on, like we have in our culture, we have, you know what, I can tell if somebody's trustworthy or not based on their credit score. Okay, people that pay their bills are usually trustworthy. People that don't pay their bills, sometimes they had hard times, but sometimes they're not trustworthy. Our culture uses it as a measure of trustworthiness. In China, you have this type of same thing, but it's a social credit score depending on what your religion is, if you put the state first, or if you put your religion first, or if you jaywalk, right? If you cross the street in China when it's a blinking red light, you're jaywalking. And then you get social demerits if your cell phone pings and facial recognition photographs pick you up. You get automatic social credits. It's not even going to court or nothing. Social demerits happen. You get a lower status. Lower status people are the garbage collectors. Very likely, this young lady, it's very likely that she's a Christian. Okay? Because Christians are the low social, they put God first, are the low social status in China. It's very likely she's a believer. This lady, I'm saying she is, but it's the garbage collector is a low social status person. Who is the one that sees the little girl and moves her to the side? They had to amputate her legs, okay, but saved her life. It's the slow social on the social economic class. Let me just tell you, right? Our leaders, no matter how corrupt they are, we asked for them, okay? We got what we asked for at some point. They at least allow us freedom of religion, and they don't foment a system that is so rigid that little girls yet are getting run over by 2 trucks in the street and 14 people pass by. I don't want to serve China. Give me AI, okay? Sorry, I don't want AI. I don't like it. I'm going to try to protect myself from it. But without it, this is a long story that I can't go into. Our way of life is because the dollar reigns supreme. It's the world reserve currency. It's the most respected currency in the world. So is the euro. So is a little bit they gave some to the Japanese yen, the Canadian dollar. Okay? Because those currencies, our way of life, our dollar's worth a lot more than it will be if the world power flip-flops. If world power goes to China, okay, what happens is not only is what I showed you going to ruin us, but our money won't be worth anything. Okay? It's why if you have money in savings or own property, you're going to get arrested for a felony. What you own will be confiscated to cover the country's bills. Okay? Here's some examples. COVID PPP loans. The payment protection loans. Okay? What were they? Well, when COVID hit, they shut down all small businesses. They let the big box stores stay open. Why? Because the big box are corporations, publicly traded, that can be controlled by a few powerful people at the top. Small businesses are owned by the middle class. They want to make the middle class serfs again. You got to shut down their businesses. COVID did it. But guess what, folks? We're going to come riding in on a white horse and save all your small business with payment protection loans. Yeah! Your small business can apply for a payment protection loan. It's a free loan application, free money, free loan application. And you have to pay it back, but you probably don't. If you do what you're supposed to do, in the fine print, which is about 80 pages long, if you do every single thing in a fine print, you don't have to pay the money back. Okay? And it's to save your small businesses. But guess what? Here's kind of like the bad news, small business people. First off, just applying for the loan means that you agree to abide by all our recommendations. All our laws. Okay? And applying for the loan, in the loan application, you agree that the government now has the ability at any time to look at every single bank account that you have, land records, find out what you own in case you cheat. We want to make sure you're spending this money for COVID reasons and on your employees like you're supposed to. So you're going to give the government, before this loan, this is a bad thing, folks, but hey, we know you're all honest people, so don't worry about it. But before this, if the government wanted to look at your bank account, they needed to get a court order, basically a search warrant from a federal judge to go to your bank and say, here's a search warrant signed by a federal judge to look at so-and-so's bank account. Just applying for a PPP loan, the government now bypasses all need for search warrants. It's automatic. They can look at your bank accounts and everything you own at any time they want. If they want to 50 times a year, they can. The other thing, who's going to give out the money is your banker, the local banker. And here's the deal with that. It's supposed to be for the small business guy, right? Let me tell you, I'm a doctor, right? At the time, I'm not super wealthy, but at the time I had money in the bank. Why? Because I didn't trust the stock market at the time. And because I had money in the bank, all these people who were applying for PPP loans and getting denied, I'm not kidding you. My banker called me and told me, hey, don't you want one of these loans? Why would he do that? I didn't even ask for it. I'll tell you why. And it's why they gave the bankers, the local bankers, the authority to give out the loans. Because the local banker wants to reward his biggest depositors. Do you understand? The small business that was hanging on the edge of making it or not never got any loans. Small business people put out of business if they didn't have bigger bank accounts during COVID. Do you think that's accidental? Okay. Do you really? So they offered me a loan. I didn't take it because I read about, I think the bill, I think I read about 80 pages. I think the whole bill of the COVID relief bill was like 300 and some pages. I read about 80 pages of it, particularly the parts about the PPE loans, but it was just massive. The amount of money that was given to different government entities and how it could be spent and who got it. Like there's plenty of folks and internet people out there telling you how it was like the Great Reset, that money was given, funneled to certain, wealthy entities, and the small business guy didn't get it. It's true. I'll tell you from personal experience, it's true. So the PPP loans did not really help the small businessman. But what's worse is that when you applied for one, you gave the government the right to know if and when and where you have money. Why do you think they might want to know? Also, they had provider relief fund payments. I'm a physician. They gave any doctors that treated a certain number of Medicare patients got money put into their accounts without even asking for it. I read some of the fine prints on that too. We were supposed to attest to that we received that money. And the fine print of the attestation, you had to, I'm just going to point out two things you had to agree to do. Okay? One thing is you had to agree to have anti-pornography filtering software on all your computers and cell phones, anything electronic that could hunt social media. The other thing is you had to agree not to engage in propaganda. Now, they didn't define propaganda, although, you know how the feds, you can see with Trump and Giuliani, his lawyer, how they define propaganda, in that they censored Trump's social media for claiming that the election was taken. They ended up, Giuliani's ruined, completely. He was Time Magazine's Man of the Year, and he's ruined because he claimed election fraud. Okay? Apparently, if you speak your mind about certain social issues or political issues, apparently, if you can't 100% prove it with what you're saying, with indisputable facts and evidence, you can't state your opinions anymore because it's propaganda. Okay? Do I think that that's good or bad? I'm not here to judge that. I'm just telling you what it is, folks. Okay? Because you don't want to end up, Trump's fines are astronomical. Okay? Giuliani's got to pay $5 million in a lawsuit. I can't afford that. Could you? Okay? Watch what you say. Watch what you do. Honor your leaders. Because if you don't, it's going to cost you everything. But why you're going to go to jail and get arrested, there's a lot of people who got the PPP loans who didn't read the fine print and didn't know what the requirements are. Okay? They are now guilty of felonies and they don't even know it. They're just trying to make it, and they're guilty of felonies. They're just trying to make it during COVID, and they end up being guilty of felonies. They could go to jail. You think the government wants them in jail? Heck no. They want to say, hey, you know what? You pay this huge fine out of the savings that we know you have in this bank account and that one, put them together, and guess what? We'll drop the charges. Trust me, you're going to jail, and then they'll get the money out of you. Okay? Think it stops there? Know anybody who got a home loan recently? I think, wasn't it in 2009? In fact, our blessed governor, long live Governor Stitt, who honor our leaders, he got his start in home loan business. I think he got kicked out of, it was North Carolina or somewhere. I'm not sure about that, but that's what I heard through multiple sources, that he was in the home loan business and did what was later determined to be predatory loans. And he ended up getting kicked out of some state, his company, not him personally. okay, but a company that he was involved in. That doesn't mean he's a bad guy. It just means he was doing business the American way, okay? But you decide for yourself. Was there a reason that all these predatory loans happened all over the country at the same time? You think there might have been a reason? Okay, is that a coincidence? Because now, here's what happens, the offshoot of that. I think that was in 2009. That whole thing blew up, the home loan thing, and they sold those loans. You know, the bank sold those loans on the stock market. And the big thing about them is that they're federally insured, okay? The bank and the institutions that do those loans are federally insured institutions. The offshoot of it is that now, have you tried to get a home loan, a new purchase loan recently? Whoever you go, no matter how much money you make, no matter who you go to, they're going to tell you you're not making enough money. Show us a little bit more income. They're kind of give you a little wink when they say it. Like, look, everyone got screwed because of that. They did back in 2009. We know. It's just red tape. We got to do it. We got to ask. Just show us some more income. How many people, precious, sweet people, if there is such a thing, because the Bible says that, the Bible says all our righteousnesses are as filthy rags. So according to the Bible, there's no precious, sweet people out there. But how many of your sons, daughters, okay, cousins, friends, that pay their taxes, they're not rapists. They go to work, get up early in the morning every day, go to work. They vacation on the weekend or rest on the weekend. How many of them you think might have fudged a little bit on their incomes when they're applying for a loan because they were told we need to show more income and you're about ready to close because they tell you just when you're ready to close. They already approved your loan, but then they come in the last minute and tell you it's not enough. How many of you, of your friends, family, or yourself, think you might have just fudged a little bit, said, okay, I make a little more? I'm going to tell you, folks, if what you said on your loan application does not exactly match your tax return, particularly if what you said in the loan application was a little higher than what's on your tax return, you're guilty of a felony, because it's a felony to lie to a financial institution that's federally insured when you're applying for a loan. It's one of the felonies that Trump's been charged and convicted of. Okay? Or actually, I can't remember. I think he has been convicted, or if I'm not 100% sure if he's been convicted yet. I've heard one account that said he actually is convicted, but they're holding off on the sentencing. But irregardless, it's what they came after him for. One of the things they came after him for. And I personally know if you apply for a car loan, I know somebody, it's the same thing. If they tell you, hey, you need to show a little bit more money. If you overestimate your earnings, like Trump overestimated, the value of his properties. If you overestimate your earnings, they can put you in jail. Do they want you to stay in jail? No, they want you to sit in jail until they come to you and they say, well, you got this and this in this bank account. We know because your PPE loan that you applied gave us permission to look. So we know where you got your money. This is what your fine is. You can afford it. Okay? I know somebody that had a car loan. Same thing with business loans, by the way. Trump applied for business loan. You can't fudge your income. If you do, it's a felony. And if you don't fudge, you're not getting a loan. How do you like that? What about this? Tax fraud. You think, okay, what's the real reason the Biden administration okayed the 87,000 new IRS agents? Are they there to just push pencils and to mark, this return looks good, this one looks good? No. They're going to use AI, and they're going to scrutinize everybody that applied for a loan, particularly, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are two government-sponsored entities that purchase and repackage. They purchase loans from, basically home loans from banks, and repackage them as mortgage-backed securities. Okay, but because they're government entities that purchase these loans. Even if you got a loan from a non-federally insured institution, but you probably did get one from a federally insured institution. But even if you didn't, because the federal government buys the loans, it ends up being a felony that if you lied for the loan that the government is going to use to repackage and sell so they can fund more home purchases. They say they're trying to, okay, so check this out. They say they're trying to fund home purchases for the average American when they're going to come and put you in jail, okay? But remember, we went up, we plateaued, we're going down, okay? There's no escaping this, okay, unless you can escape AI, okay? But AI's got you, okay? Because now every loan application is going to an AI database. All your taxes going to AI database, and they're comparing them. Okay? The Trump Corporation faced tax fraud charges and were convicted. I know they're convicted of this. The penalties, okay, the penalties portend doom for all Americans. You know, I'm just gonna tell you the one big thing that should scare all American businesses. What Trump's organization was convicted of. They're convicted of tax fraud because what they did is they gave in New York City. They gave some free apartments as part of a salary package, but they called it a non-taxable income because it's something that they said, well, it's something because we want you to be even, okay, yeah, you got a house in the Hamptons or wherever the heck you live, but sometimes we need you at a moment's notice to be in New York City. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to pay for your apartment in New York City. Okay, which could cost it could be like $10,000 a month. Okay, they're very expensive. Now, it's not really that important that the employees that got that actually set their girlfriends in those apartments. Okay, what matters is that the Trump organization would say is that you could stay there if you needed to when we needed you. So it was a necessary business expense. It's not taxable income. Well, the government came along and they know because of AI, your cell phone records, where you are and how much time you actually spend in that apartment. Okay. You're only there 2 hours every weekend. Okay. Seeing your girlfriend. That's not a business expense. That was a taxable income. And this was a conspiracy to commit tax fraud. Exactly what they got him for. Okay? Not exaggerating. Something that I was following prior to COVID. I was following the federal government because I knew something was up. I couldn't figure out what was going on. The big people, big money people were pulling their money out of the stock market. I just had this funny feeling something was going to happen. I started following the U.S. federal court districts. Every single U.S. federal court district has a U.S. attorney's office attached to it. Prior to COVID, just prior to COVID, within the year prior to COVID, every single one of those federal court districts hired staff, and they actually basically doubled their staff in the area of civil recovery and civil enforcement. Why? Is it a coincidence that right after that, COVID hits and all these people get loans that they have specific requirements that they have to do that if they don't do, they can be fined for federal code of regulations violations that they agreed to when they signed for the loan. Like literally, you would have needed to pay an attorney about 15, 20 hours of his time to go through the fine print and then compare it to your situation to see if you could even get one of these loans. Okay? Telling you, you're going to jail and they're gonna know where your money is and they're gonna come after it. And particularly, here's who's gonna go to prison. There's a lot of people. I'm not saying it's the majority of people who got the loans, but there's a significant group of people who really, in their opinion, This was all a created thing to put the middle class out of business. And their way of fighting back was to say, well, look at all the unbelievable waste money that this COVID bill gives to all these rich corporations and people that run these corporations. And I'm just getting a measly little bit to pay my employees. It was way too easy to fudge a little bit on your loan application. Maybe you said you have a couple more employees than you didn't have. Okay, than you actually had. Maybe you even said, well, I got this home business I run out of my home. I've never had it incorporated, but I could go quickly get it incorporated. In fact, I could apply for the loan now and then get it incorporated, okay, and have another business, and I could get more money. How many people did that? Okay, I'm going to tell you, a significant amount of people did it. And their justification is, look at what the crooks in Washington / and the corporate crooks are doing. Why can't I do it? Well, here's why you can't do it. Because you're going to go to jail. Why? Because you're not the elite. You're a serf. Never forget it. Oh, you're not a serf yet. You're about to be. You'll own nothing and be happy. And if you own something, they're coming after it. How do you like that? So you don't own anything, but you're going to be happy because they're going to give you enough to eat. You get to keep one car. The MAGA people who think that Donald Trump can make America great again really are grasping at straws. You know what, rich Americans, double-digit millionaires, okay? Let's say I was a single-digit millionaire. I'm not making enough to do this, okay? Double-digit millionaires, you know what they're doing to save their wealth? They're getting second citizenships in foreign countries. Why? Because, let's say I could apply for Irish citizenship because my grandfather was Irish. Let's say I was to get it, right? I could put my assets in an Irish bank account as an Irish citizen, and the U.S. government can't get it. To pay their national debt, the U.S. government can't get it. Okay? That's why you're seeing a lot of people get dual citizenship. So it's the moral reasons, the moral compass of the country is the real reason that Trump, no matter how much he'd like to, and I think he means well, no matter how much he'd like to, why he can't make America great again unless we had either our citizens miraculously turned to the Bible and became so moral to their own, basically self-detriment, where they would put others first, or we had massive surveillance, totally invasive and pervasive surveillance to make sure that everybody was doing at all times what they're supposed to do. Of course, only the super wealthy would be able to get away with doing whatever they want. But the rest of us serfs, okay, no, we have to follow all the rules laid down by our leaders. So anybody that thinks that Donald Trump, like the MAGA people, that Donald Trump can make America great again, I want you to consider that under Trump administration, his first term in presidency, we lost more freedoms than any other sitting president in the United States history. Okay, the guy that's supposed to help save the middle class, who's an elitist, right? Trump's not a middle class. He's wealthy. Do you think he really wants company? Okay, but I do think he wants to help the middle class. I do think he does. But can he? Can he help save our freedoms? Under the Trump administration, we lost more freedoms than we ever lost before. Let me illustrate to you, okay? To the elite left, Trump was the gift that keeps on giving, okay? I'll illustrate that. Initially with COVID, we lost our freedom of assembly. Then, when the riots occurred, what does President Trump do? Well, he urged police to be a little rougher on those rioters. Remember he said kind of crack a few heads or maybe push their head in, when they're pushing them in a police car. Think about that, okay? They're not convicted criminals that he's saying to do that to. And what if one day church people, because you serve God, that you're a criminal, okay? Do we really want to have our police officers, manhandling suspects. Okay, even if there's a riot going on, we lost our freedom to assemble and protest, particularly at the White House when the election, when there was so much evidence. You can't say there was voter fraud or tabulating fraud in that election between Biden and Donald Trump. You can't say for sure that there was fraud. Okay, Rudy Giuliani said there's fraud, and he's has to pay $5 million in lawsuit for saying that. But you can definitely say there was a lot of evidence that pointed to fraud, like a lot. Okay, and I mean, I read there's like 15 pages of anomalies in procedures and tabulations and how votes were counted and cast. But you can't say it's fraud because that's propaganda, and you can't prove it beyond shadow of a doubt. All those people, that the Republicans would say would be good MAGA people who stormed the White House, Trump invited them. He was basically pleading with America to help stop the election from being thrown by bad vote tabulating. Okay, inconsistencies that were discovered and found. That was everybody knew of those, and a lot of people today haven't studied how bad it really was. Trump was fairly aware, President Trump, so was Rudy Giuliani, and a lot of the Republican folks were pretty aware of how bad the level of inconsistencies and inability to reproduce results, lost records or irretrievable records, voting records, or, even some of the machines couldn't tell you, reproduce what was done. Okay, that's crazy. And the voting machines were called Dominion. Okay, are they not telling you, signaling? They're called Dominion. Is that not a subtle signal that who really has dominion of the country? But President Trump was very, very upset that he lost the election, and he thought it was because of fraud. And he was telling his constituents, he basically, for all intents and purposes, practically invited people to come to the White House. And all those people that went there, the ones that were actually, the Republicans, actually, the MAGA Republicans, by and large, went to the White House peacefully. The folks that were doing the crazy stuff, a lot of them were dressed up in costumes. Okay, if you're an intelligent thinking person, is the average Trumpster, the average MAGA person. Okay, I think that the average Trumpster, the average MAGA person is somewhat disillusioned. I really do, because I don't think Mr. Trump, no matter what his intentions, I don't think he could save our country. Okay, with our current banking system and the current national debt load as it is, I don't think the countries can be saved. But do you really think that these people would dress up like crazy people? Or do you think they might just have been plants put there to make the MAGA people look like they're nuts? Okay, why that could happen? Imagine if you're on the other side that wants to control, let's say there is an elite that wants to control the country. They probably didn't want Trump getting elected because he wasn't really willing to play ball 100%. Okay, so, and for other reasons too, because COVID was hitting, and I'm not going to go into all that, what COVID did for our country, but look at what the result of COVID, what it did for our country, because it put a whole lot of free money in the hands of the general public, and it knocked back our enemies. Okay, if China is an enemy, I'm not saying they are, but let's say if they're a potential enemy, COVID held their ships. They couldn't deliver their products, their ships. Their ships were held up in ports for months, and they're being repaid. China sold us all those goods for treasury bills, right? They hold U.S. debt. COVID dumped all this free money into the economy. Inflation dropped the value of the dollar so far. China's being repaid way less than they thought. Basically, China's economy is in the toilet right now, and a large part of it is due to COVID, okay, directly. So in a way, COVID helped us temporarily sideline our enemy, right? think about when these Republican people raided the White House. A lot of them were going there because Trump invited them to come, and they wanted to support President Trump, saying, "We believe you were really the rightfully elected president. We don't trust our election." Now, you can get into whether that's legal or if it's illegal. Okay, it should be 100% legal to peacefully protest, even if you want to peacefully protest an election. I think there's a good bit of evidence that the people that did the vandalism, that they were not the run-of-the-mill MAGA person, okay? Now, who they were, it's political to get into. I think they could have been planted there by for some nefarious purposes, basically to discredit the MAGA movement, to discredit Trump, because ultimately what happens, we lose freedom of speech because we raided / the Republicans, some Republicans raided the White House. Did they help their cause? They wanted to stop what was in their mind. They wanted to stop election fraud. They want to bring back the middle class, stop the Democrats, and stop election fraud. Did they achieve their goals? The answer is absolutely not. And under Trump, it's like he's the gift that keeps on giving. He invited these people. They fell right into the trap. Not that Trump set the trap, but he was part of a trap, because by going there, a lot of these people that went there who personally did not commit any crimes had to plead no contest to felony charges. Okay, they didn't do jail time or anything. They paid fines, but now they're felons. It's how, you know how hard it is to get a job as a felon, and they can't own a gun anymore. If you're a felon, you can't have a weapon. Trump's a felon, convicted felon. He's not allowed to have a gun. Under Trump, the people that supported Trump the most lose the most freedoms. You really want to continue down that vein of he's going to save our freedoms when, like I said, to them, the way he talked and even if it was true what he said about if there was election fraud or whatever, okay, even if it was true, him saying that and fomenting a protest that some people took toward vandalism, because of that, we lost a large part of our ability to publicly protest. We lost social media freedom because he's a sitting president over the United States, and they censor his social media. Do people not realize the implications of that? That means my social media is going to get censored. If they censored Trump, a sitting president's social media, so's your and my social media going to get censored. If we can't protest, if it's not the right kind of protest that they'll allow, we can't protest anymore, or the guy next to us might commit some violent act of vandalism, somebody we don't even know, and we could get charged. Okay? You see where it's going? We're losing our freedoms. President Trump didn't help us. Okay? He was the gift that kept on giving the left, to the left, to take away our freedoms, even though his intentions maybe were very good. Maybe Trump's part of a conspiracy to take our freedoms away. Okay? That's not impossible to think that. Okay? But, I mean, I doubt it because of how his family, his personally and his family have financially and personally and socially suffered, okay, for their stance, and how his friends have suffered. Like Giuliani's ruined. Okay, Time Man of the Year is ruined for standing up for President Trump during those election results. That man will not recover from the financial ruin that has befell him. So here I could read it like this. Trump asked the public for help in protesting and negating the fraudulent election results, and effectively invited protesters into the White House. All right. Rudy Giuliani was successfully sued for over $5 million for publicly declaring that many of the voting tabulations and ballots were fraudulently placed and or fraudulently counted. Okay, you can't publicly declare that unless you can absolutely, beyond shadow of a doubt, prove it. Because these are, state election officials that you're accusing of fraud. Okay? Giuliani was rightfully questioning the validity of the voting processes in several state voting districts where the voting and tabulation irregularities were so egregious and so egregious that they, by so many accounts, screamed fraud. And this truly seems so, particularly in view of how many of the irregularities were accompanied by either lost or irretrievable records. So many accidents, so many irregularities, so many occurrences of unfortunate events, many of which were blamed on the hardships brought upon by the COVID pandemic, and which were overlooked because of the same. If it had not been for COVID, the final tabulations in many key districts would have been declared invalid. Most likely. I can't say that for 100% sure because I'm not the election official. The election officials decide that. But when you read through the pages and pages and pages of irregularities, I would be very shocked if those elections would have been ratified or those tabulations would have been certified if it wasn't for the COVID pandemic. And then there was the fact that the irregularities seemed so largely, this is probably the biggest thing that made the Republican MAGA people upset. There was the fact that the irregularities seemed so largely in favor of Joe Biden that Rudy Giuliani, Trump's lawyer, was right to demand that some states refuse to ratify the voting counts. Look, nobody would say that Trump won and that Biden lost, that Donald Trump won and that Joe Biden lost. No, but what you could say is that in many districts, the votes could not be declared as valid in the way that the election particularly was run and in some cases. Rudy Giuliani, Trump's lawyer, was right to demand that some states refuse to ratify the voting counts. But he used the claim of fraud. It's one thing to hear of numerous accounts and of evidence of patterns that scream fraud, and it's another thing to prove fraud and to claim that fraud took place if you can't prove it. For to prove fraud, you'd really probably need to have a RICO case and confessions of public voting officials to publicly prove mass voter fraud, which is what basically the Trump organization and Rudy Giuliani were claiming. For this one mistake that Rudy Giuliani charged that there was fraud, for saying that, it was an ill-fated bid to stand for truth and justice. For that, Rudy Giuliani's the Time magazine's Man of the Year is forever horribly ruined. If somebody of a higher pay grade than President Trump does not want President Trump as president, it's probably safe to say that you or I can't do anything about it. It's probably safe to say that George Carlin was right, the comedian, when he said he doesn't vote, because he said that we really can't pick our leaders, and even if we do pick our leaders, they're under the control of their handlers. So ultimately, I think the last sitting president, me personally, that I would say was a real true patriot was John F. Kennedy, even though, he came from an interesting background. But I think he was a true patriot because he was going to try to put us back on a silver standard, which would help prevent such a ballooning national debt. And he was assassinated. You can't prove he was assassinated for that reason, but that's what he wanted to do, and he was assassinated. It's likely that if President Trump was going to be, if he couldn't be stopped or silenced or made to look like a buffoon, okay, it's fairly likely he could be assassinated. So that's why I don't think that there's a way to make the Republican will achieve its goal. I don't think you can make Donald Trump win. I don't think you can make him be able to achieve what he acts like and what MAGA wants him to achieve. I think that what we do, if you're wise, you submit to your leaders. If you want to suffer for righteousness' sake, do it for the Lord, because Rudy Giuliani may have suffered for righteousness' sake in his mind, but God's not directly involved in politics and who's president and who isn't, okay? And Rudy Giuliani suffered, his whole financial life is ruined. He can't even keep a watch that was given to him by his father because it's a luxury watch and he's in debt. And in the state of New York, this judge is not going to allow anybody, not even a former man of the year, to live in luxury when he's in debt. His financial life is over. And he supported Trump. Okay? And he's way better man than you or I. You think we're going to do anything and make any big difference? Okay? If I'm going to lose my health and or my wealth, I want it to be for Jesus Christ alone.